He slid the divorce papers across the table. Like I was nothing more than a receipt he was done with, and then he said it, right there in front of his lawyers, in front of her. You were never my wife, you were my PR strategy. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there, quiet, still, holding my father's diary in my hands, and I let him finish because there was something no one in that room knew yet, not his lawyers, not the woman sitting beside him, not even him. That building he was so proud of, that empire he bragged about, the ground it stands on, my father bought it anonymously, and when he died he didn't leave it to a company, he didn't leave it to a board. He left every single piece of it to me. The judge opened the folder, the room shifted, and the most powerful man in that room went completely silent. Hey, beautiful souls, welcome to Mr. James Family Returns. I'm your storyteller, James, and I missed you. YouTube took everything from me overnight. Every channel, every story, gone, but they couldn't take us, so we're starting again right here, right now, together, 1,000 subscribers. That's our first step, so go ahead. Hit that subscribe button and show the world this family is unbreakable. Now let's begin, and trust me, beautiful souls, you are not ready for this one. The room smelled like money and cruelty. Sienna Vance had walked into that boardroom 100 times before, carrying coffee, carrying contracts, carrying Liam's ego on her back like it weighed nothing. But today was different. Today she walked in carrying her silence like a shield, and nobody in that room understood what that meant yet. The boardroom of Sterling Enterprises sat on the 42nd floor of downtown Chicago, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a table long enough to seat 20 people, and at the head of that table sat Liam Sterling, 34 years old, white, sharp jawline, expensive haircut, cufflinks that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He leaned back in his chair like a king who had already decided the outcome of a war before the battle even started. Next to him sat Chloe Harmon, blonde, perfect manicure, a smile that never quite reached her eyes because her eyes were always calculating something. She had her hand resting on Liam's arm like she was marking territory, and when Sienna walked through the door, Chloe looked at her the way people look at something they're about to throw away. Sienna sat down across from them. She was 26. Natural hair in beautiful braids that framed her face, deep brown eyes that had seen too much too young. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing trying too hard, and she carried a small leather diary pressed against her chest. Not a phone, not a lawyer's folder, just a diary. Her lawyer, Marcus Webb, a quiet older black man with silver at his temples, sat beside her and said nothing yet. He just opened his briefcase slowly and waited. Liam didn't wait. He slid the divorce papers across the table like he was dealing cards. They skidded to a stop right in front of Sienna, and he watched her face with this look, this specific look, like he was hoping to see her shatter. She didn't shatter. She looked down at the papers. Then she looked back up at him. "Sign it," Liam said. His voice was flat, bored, like this was a minor inconvenience in an otherwise productive Tuesday.
"Let's not make this dramatic."
Chloe laughed softly. This little breathy laugh that wasn't really a laugh. It was a dismissal dressed up as amusement. She leaned slightly forward and said, "Honey, you should be grateful he's even giving you a settlement. Most women in your position would have been escorted out months ago." Sienna said nothing. That silence made Chloe uncomfortable. You could see it, just barely, in the way her smile stiffened. Liam picked up his pen and tapped it against the table, once, twice, like a countdown. "Sienna, we both know what this is. Let's not sit here and pretend this marriage was something it wasn't." And that's when he said it. That's when Liam Sterling, the man she had loved, prayed for, worked beside, and believed in, opened his mouth and said the thing that would define the rest of his life. "Women like you," he started, and he said it so casually, so easily, like the words had been sitting in his mouth for years, just waiting for permission. "Women like you were never meant to sit at tables like this. I married you because I needed to look a certain way, humble, diverse, relatable to the public. My PR team actually suggested it." He paused, let that land. Then he smiled. "You were a strategy, Sienna, a very effective one. But strategies expire." The room went quiet. Even Chloe blinked. Marcus Webb's pen stopped moving. Sienna's fingers tightened around her diary, just slightly. Just enough that if you were watching closely, really watching, you would have noticed. But her face? Her face was completely still. Liam kept going, because men like Liam always keep going when nobody stops them. I built something real here, something that matters, and I need a woman beside me who matches that, someone who belongs in this world. He glanced at Chloe. I found my queen. You were always just temporary furniture. 3 years of her life. 3 years of waking up at 5 in the morning to review his business proposals before he even opened his eyes. 3 years of sitting beside him in meetings where he presented her ideas as his own. 3 years of talking him off ledges when investors pulled out, when deals collapsed, when he cried, actually cried, into her shoulder at 2 in the morning saying he didn't know if he could do it. 3 years. And she was furniture. Sienna placed her hand flat on the divorce papers. She didn't pick up a pen. She didn't sign. She just let her hand rest there, and she looked at Liam for a long, quiet moment. Are you done? She asked. Her voice was soft, not weak, soft. There's a difference that most people never learn. Liam frowned. Excuse me? I'm asking if you're finished talking, she said, because I want to make sure you've said everything you need to say. I want you to have no regrets about today. Something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not yet, but something. A small crack in the performance. Sign the papers, Sienna. She looked down at the diary in her hands. She ran her thumb across the worn leather cover slowly, like she was reading something in braille that nobody else could see. Then she looked up again. My father gave me this, she said quietly, the day I got married. He said to me. She paused, and you could see her swallow. Just once, baby girl, keep your eyes open, not just to see the good, but to know when it's time. Liam made an impatient sound. This isn't a therapy session. He's gone now, Sienna continued, as if Liam hadn't spoken. Passed away 4 months ago. I was grieving, you know that. You were there. Or, she tilted her head slightly, you were present. There's a difference. Chloe shifted in her seat. Marcus Webb quietly placed a single document on the table in front of him. He didn't open it, he just placed it there. Liam saw it. His eyes went to it briefly, then back to Sienna. What is that? We'll get to it, Marcus said. His first words of the entire meeting, calm, patient. Like a man who has all the time in the world. Liam didn't like that. He sat up straighter. Listen, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this is a straightforward divorce. There is no shared property. There is no shared property. Marcus raised an eyebrow, just one, very slightly. Interesting, the prenup is airtight, Liam said. His voice had sharpened now. The bored king was becoming a slightly nervous king, and that shift, that tiny shift, was everything. My lawyers drafted it. She signed it. End of story. Sienna finally spoke again. You know what I thought about this morning, Liam? I thought about the night before we got married. You were so scared. You were sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in that little suit that didn't quite fit yet, and you told me that you were terrified you weren't enough, that the world was going to find out you were just a regular guy pretending. She paused. I told you that you were more than enough. I meant it. Liam's jaw tightened. I'm curious, she said, and her voice dropped just slightly lower. When did you stop believing that? Or did you just decide it was easier to believe I was the problem? The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. Heavier, fuller. Chloe cleared her throat. This is Chloe. Sienna looked at her directly for the first time. Not with anger, not with jealousy, just directly, like looking at a mirror that shows you something you already knew. I have no issue with you. You made choices. He made choices. That's between the two of you and God. Chloe opened her mouth, closed it. Liam slapped the table with his palm. Not hard, but enough, enough. This ends today. Judge Harrington is coming in at 11 to finalize. This is done. Yes, Sienna said simply. It is. She finally let go of her diary. She placed it on the table beside the unsigned divorce papers. She folded her hands in her lap and she waited, and in that waiting, in that absolute, unshakable, terrifying calm, something changed in the room. Because Liam Sterling had spent 3 years believing that Sienna's gentleness was weakness. Her patience was desperation, her silence was defeat. He had never once considered that it might be something else entirely. He had never once considered that the woman sitting across from him, the woman he had just called furniture, might be the only reason the table they were all sitting at existed in the first place. At 10:58 a.m., the door to the boardroom opened. Judge Harrington walked in, 62 years old, reading glasses perched on his nose. A folder tucked under his arm that looked ordinary enough. It was not ordinary. Liam leaned over to his lawyer and murmured something with a smirk. His lawyer nodded. Chloe smoothed her hair, and Sienna Vance sat completely still, her diary on the table, her hands folded, her deep brown eyes resting on the judge's folder with an expression that nobody in that room could quite read, not grief, not fear, something that looked almost impossibly like peace. The judge sat down. He opened the folder. He cleared his throat, and the room, the whole carefully constructed, expensive, cruelty-scented room, held its breath. Judge Harrington didn't rush. That was the first thing Sienna noticed about him. The way he moved through the room like time was something he owned rather than something that owned him. He pulled out his chair slowly, set his folder down carefully, adjusted his reading glasses with 2 fingers, and then he sat, folded his hands on top of the closed folder, and looked around the table at every single person present before he said one word. Liam was already leaning forward slightly. Not enough to look eager. Men like Liam never let themselves look eager, but enough. His lawyer, a thin man named Gerald Pruitt with a permanently tight expression, had a stack of documents organized in front of him like a fortress. Chloe had stopped touching Liam's arm. She'd moved her chair back just slightly, not obviously, just enough. Like some deep animal instinct was already whispering to her that she should create distance between herself and whatever was about to happen. Marcus Webb sat beside Sienna with his hands flat on the table. Relaxed, unhurried, Sienna herself hadn't moved. Her diary was still on the table, her hands were still folded in her lap, but her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had witnessed 3 years of a slow, quiet devastation, were resting on Judge Harrington's closed folder with a steadiness that was almost unnatural for someone sitting at a divorce table. "Before we proceed," Judge Harrington said, his voice low and even, "I want to establish that all parties are present and that all parties understand the nature of today's proceedings." Gerald Pruitt cut in immediately. "Your Honor, the proceedings are straightforward. We have a signed prenuptial agreement. We have the divorce petition filed by Mr. Sterling, and we simply need Mr. Pruitt." Judge Harrington didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, he just said the name, and Gerald Pruitt stopped talking like someone had pressed a button. "I'm aware of what you have. I'm telling you what I have, and what I have changes the nature of this conversation considerably." Liam's smirk flickered, just for a second. "What exactly do you have?" Liam asked. His voice was still controlled, still performing confidence. But something underneath it had shifted, a tone, a frequency like a string on a guitar that's been tuned just slightly wrong. Judge Harrington opened the folder. He didn't pull everything out at once. He took out a single document first, thick, cream-colored paper, the kind that feels important before you even read a word on it, and he set it in the center of the table where everyone could see it without being able to read it. At the top, in clean black print, were 4 words, "Last Will and Testament," and below that, a name. Elijah James Vance. The room went very, very still. Sienna closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When she opened them, she was looking at her father's name on that document, and something moved across her face, grief and love and something fierce all tangled together, and then it was gone, tucked back behind that stillness she wore like armor. Liam stared at the document, then he looked at Sienna, then back at the document. "What is this?" he asked. "What does her father's will have to do with our divorce?" "Everything," Marcus Webb said quietly. It was only his second sentence of the entire morning, and he said it the way people say things when they've been waiting a long time to say them. Liam turned to Gerald. Gerald was already frowning at the document, leaning forward, scanning. His expression was the expression of a man who is very good at his job, suddenly realizing that the job has become much more complicated than advertised. "Your Honor," Gerald said carefully, "with respect, we were not made aware of any estate complications prior to today. If there is a will being introduced, proper discovery protocols should have. The will was filed with this court 4 months ago," Judge Harrington said. "The same week Mr. Elijah Vance passed away. It has been properly documented, verified, and authenticated. The reason it is being introduced today in this proceeding specifically will become clear in approximately 30 seconds if you will allow me to continue." Gerald sat back. Liam said nothing. Judge Harrington picked up the document and began to read. Not the entire thing, just a section carefully marked with a small yellow tab, the kind that lawyers use when they know exactly which paragraph is going to change someone's life. I, Elijah James Vance, he read, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish the following conditions regarding the assets, properties and holdings under the Vance Family Trust effective upon the date of my passing. He paused. Let that settle, then he continued. My daughter, Sienna Marie Vance, is the sole heir to the Vance Family Trust, which includes but is not limited to all properties held under the name Vance Real Estate Holdings LLC, all liquid assets currently valued at the time of filing, all shares and equity interests in affiliated companies, and full ownership of the ground on which Sterling Enterprises headquarters currently stands, located at 4200 Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. The silence that followed was not the polite, tense silence from earlier. This was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of a room full of people whose understanding of reality had just been surgically removed and replaced with something else entirely. Chloe made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Gerald Pruitt's pen dropped from his fingers and hit the table. He didn't pick it up. Liam didn't move. He sat completely still, and the color, that healthy, expensive Chicago winter tan, drained from his face in a way that was almost fascinating to watch, like watching paint dissolve in water. I'm sorry, Liam said slowly, each word separated, measured, like he was testing whether language still worked the way he remembered. Did you just say the ground under my building? Your building, Judge Harrington said, and there was something in the way he said those two words, not cruel, just precise, that made it clear he understood the weight of them. Sits on land that was anonymously gifted to you via a third-party trust at the time of your marriage to Sienna Vance. The donor of that land was Elijah Vance. He chose to remain anonymous. The judge looked up over his reading glasses. He wanted to give his son-in-law a foundation. Literally, Liam's mouth opened, closed. Marcus Webb finally opened the second document he'd brought, the one he'd been holding back since the beginning of the meeting, and slid it across the table to Liam's side with the calm efficiency of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. Liam looked at it. His eyes moved across the page. Once, twice, 3 times, like he kept hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They didn't. Now let's go back, because to understand what happened in that boardroom, you have to understand who Elijah Vance actually was. And to understand that, you have to go back 7 years. Sienna was 19 the first time she truly understood her father's silence. They were sitting on the porch of what she had always believed was their modest home, a clean, middle-class house in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Her father would come home every evening in the same unremarkable car, same worn jacket, same thermos of coffee that he filled himself every morning. He didn't wear a watch. He didn't carry a phone that looked like anything special. He lived like a man who was comfortable with exactly what he had, what Sienna did not know, what nobody in their neighborhood knew, what most people in Chicago's business world didn't know, was that Elijah Vance was the quiet force behind nearly a third of the real estate that shaped the city's south and west sides. He had started with one building, a condemned apartment complex that everyone else had written off. He bought it for almost nothing, rebuilt it with his own hands and borrowed ones, and rented it to families who needed a home and a fair landlord. Then he bought another, then another. He never put his name on anything visible. He worked through trusts, through LLCs with names that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know where to look. He built a real estate empire the way some people build sandcastles, quietly, methodically, never drawing a crowd. Why don't you let people know? Sienna had asked him that night on the porch. She was 19 and still believed that success was something you showed people. Elijah had looked at her for a long moment. He had a face that seemed to hold weather in it. Not storm, exactly, but the particular stillness that comes just before rain when the air changes and everything gets quiet. Because, he said, money tells you who people really are, not having it, having it. He paused. If people know what I have, they'll never show me who they are. They'll only show me what they want from me. Sienna had nodded like she understood. She hadn't. Not really. Not yet. She understood it at 23 when she met Liam Sterling. Liam had been charming in the specific way that ambitious young men can be charming, which is to say completely and utterly when he needed something, and considerably less so when he didn't. He was building Sterling Enterprises from scratch back then, a tech-adjacent real estate company that was smart in concept but starving for capital and connections. He had the ideas, he didn't have the foundation, and when he met Sienna at a mutual friends gathering, this quiet, beautiful woman with braids and deep eyes who laughed easily and listened like she genuinely meant it, he had felt two things simultaneously. The first was genuine attraction, and in fairness to whatever version of Liam existed back then, it was real. He had looked at Sienna and seen something that he recognized, some quality of steadiness that he had never managed to find in himself, and he had wanted to be near it. The second thing he felt was calculation, and the calculation said, she's warm, she's humble, she's from a modest background, and being with her makes me look like a man of character rather than a man of ambition. He never quite admitted that second part to himself. That's the thing about people like Liam. They're not always consciously cruel. Sometimes they're just deeply, perfectly, catastrophically selfish, and they've told themselves the story of their own goodness so many times that they've stopped being able to see the gaps. Sienna had told her father about Liam 3 months after they met. Elijah had listened. He'd asked 3 questions, not about Liam's business or his ambitions or his background. He'd asked, does he listen when you're tired? Does he apologize when he's wrong? And does he make you feel like yourself or like a better version of what he needs? Sienna had answered honestly, mostly yes sometimes, and she'd hesitated on the third one. Elijah had nodded slowly. He hadn't said anything else that night, but the following week, without telling Sienna, without telling anyone, he had made a quiet inquiry through one of his many anonymous trusts. He had discovered that the location Liam had chosen for his headquarters, the land he was trying desperately to secure financing for, was available, and Elijah Vance had bought it. And then he had gifted it anonymously, not because he thought Liam was a good man, but because he thought Liam could become one given the right foundation, given the right woman beside him, given time. He was wrong about Liam, he was not wrong about Sienna. And so when he sat down to write his will 4 months ago, while Sienna sat beside his hospital bed reading to him and not knowing that he already knew what Liam was, Elijah Vance wrote something very specific. He wrote something that was not revenge. It was, in its own particular way, something much more like justice. Back in the boardroom, Judge Harrington was still reading. Furthermore, he continued, his voice measured and unhurried, the will includes a character clause, a condition established by Mr. Elijah Vance at the time the anonymous land gift was made and formalized in this document, which states the following. He paused, adjusted his glasses. Should Liam Sterling remain a faithful, respectful, and present husband to Sienna Marie Vance, all properties gifted and all related assets shall transfer permanently to Liam Sterling with no conditions. Should Liam Sterling choose to divorce Sienna Vance, betray her trust, or engage in conduct that demonstrates moral failure as a husband and partner, all gifted properties revert immediately to the Vance family trust. In addition, Sienna Marie Vance shall receive 70% of all equity in Sterling Enterprises, as the company's foundational success was built on resources, land and support, emotional and otherwise, provided directly or indirectly through the Vance family. The judge lowered the document. Nobody in the room made a sound. Liam was staring at the table. He had gone somewhere else, somewhere behind his own eyes, and what was happening on his face was not something Sienna had ever seen there before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the cold, controlled expression he'd worn all morning. It was something rawer than that. Something that looked uncomfortably like the man he used to be at 2 in the morning, crying into her shoulder, terrified that the world was going to find out he wasn't enough. Chloe stood up. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't storm out. She just stood up, picked up her bag, the designer one that Liam had bought her last spring, and looped it over her shoulder. She looked at Liam for a moment. He looked back at her, and in that look, in that single, wordless exchange, 3 months of whatever they had been to each other dissolved completely. Because Chloe Harmon was many things, but she had never pretended to herself about what she wanted. She wanted the life, the floor, the cufflinks, the table. And if the table was gone, I'll see myself out, she said, and she walked to the door and she opened it and she left. The door didn't slam. That somehow made it worse. Liam watched the door for a moment after it closed. Then he looked down at his hands. Gerald Pruitt was already gathering his documents. His expression had shifted from tightly professional to something more honest, the expression of a lawyer who has just realized his client has been sitting on a live grenade and calling it a paperweight. "Liam," Gerald said quietly, leaning toward him. We should take a recess." And Gerald. Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Stop." Gerald stopped. Marcus Webb quietly collected the documents on his side of the table. He straightened them, set them in his briefcase, closed the clasps with 2 soft clicks. Then he folded his hands and waited, because there was nothing left for him to do. The work was done. The truth had walked itself into the room and sat down at the table, and now everyone just had to decide what to do with it. Judge Harrington removed his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose slowly. "Mr. Sterling, do you require a recess?" Liam didn't answer right away. He was looking at Sienna. She hadn't moved, hadn't shifted in a chair, hadn't changed her expression by even a fraction. She was just there, present, the same way she had always been present, steady and quiet and real, in a way that he had spent 3 years mistaking for smallness. "Sienna," Liam said. Her name in his mouth sounded different now. No performance in it, no strategy. Just the word itself, slightly broken at the edges. She looked at him. "Your father," he started, "was the best man I've ever known," she said quietly, not cutting him off, finishing the thought for him, because she already knew what he was going to say and she wanted to say it herself. "He didn't do this to punish you, Liam. He did it because he loved me enough to make sure I would be okay." She paused. He just didn't know how long it would take. Liam's throat moved. He looked away. Looked at the window, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Chicago skyline, the city spread out 42 floors below them like a painting of everything he thought he'd built, everything he thought he owned. "The ground," he said, almost to himself. "He gave me the ground. He gave you a chance," Sienna said. "You chose what you did with it." The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, Chicago moved the way cities move, without caring, without stopping, without noticing the specific moment when someone's entire understanding of their own life collapsed and had to be rebuilt from the foundation up. Judge Harrington put his glasses back on. "We'll take a 20-minute recess," he said. It wasn't a question. He stood, gathered his folder, and left the room with the same unhurried precision with which he'd entered it. Gerald followed, murmuring something into his phone, and then it was just the 2 of them, Liam Sterling and Sienna Vance, husband and wife. The papers still unsigned on the table between them. Liam looked at them, then he looked at her, and something in his face cracked, not dramatically, not with tears or theatrics, just this quiet, internal fracturing, the sound of which only Sienna could have recognized because she was the only one who had ever been close enough to hear the sounds he made when something real was happening inside him. "I called you furniture," he said, like he was hearing it for the first time. Sienna said nothing. "I said it like it was." He stopped, pressed his lips together, stood again. "I practiced that speech, Sienna. I wrote it out the night before, in the hotel. I practiced being cruel because I knew if I wasn't, I'd..." He stopped again. "You'd what?" she asked. He didn't answer that. She hadn't expected him to. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some truths take longer than a boardroom to reach the surface. Sienna picked up her diary from the table. She held it for a moment, both hands, the way you hold something precious and heavy at the same time. Then she stood up. She straightened her dress. She gathered herself, not dramatically, not for anyone watching, just the simple, private act of a woman pulling herself back to her full height after a very long time of being made to feel small. She walked to the window. She looked out at Chicago, the same city her father had built pieces of quietly, without anyone's permission or applause. The same city where she had walked beside Liam for 3 years, carrying his dream like it was both of theirs. She pressed one hand flat against the glass, and she thought about her father. She thought about that porch, that evening, that particular quality of his silence. Money tells you who people really are. Not having it behind her, she heard Liam exhale, a long, unsteady sound, like someone releasing something they've been holding for a very long time. She didn't turn around. Not yet, because Chapter 3 was coming, and Chapter 3 was hers. 20 minutes passed, then 25. Nobody came back into the boardroom except the two of them, and even that felt like too many people for the kind of silence that had settled between Sienna and Liam. It wasn't comfortable silence. It wasn't the easy, wordless kind that two people share when they know each other so well that language becomes optional. It was the silence of aftermath, the silence that lives in the space between what was said and what can never be unsaid. The silence that has weight and texture and edges sharp enough to cut. Sienna was still standing at the window. Her hand had come down from the glass. She stood with her arms at her sides now, her diary tucked under one arm, looking out at Chicago the way her father had taught her to look at hard things. Straight on, without flinching, without romanticizing, without running. Behind her, Liam hadn't moved from his chair. He was still sitting at the head of that long table, the table where he had slid divorce papers at her like she was a transaction to be closed, the table where he had called her furniture, the table that sat inside a building that sat on land that her father had quietly, anonymously, lovingly placed beneath his feet, and he looked like a man who had been asked to solve an equation that kept changing every time he got close to the answer. His cufflinks caught the light when he moved his hand. He stared at them for a moment. Italian, custom-made. He'd had them made the week Sterling Enterprises crossed its first 100 million in valuation. He remembered the exact day. He remembered calling his mother and his college roommate and his college professor. He remembered who he had not called. He had not called Sienna. She had found out about it when she came home and saw the cufflinks in a velvet box on the kitchen counter. She had picked them up and looked at them and said, "These are beautiful, Liam. You earned this." And she had hugged him from behind and pressed her face between his shoulder blades and held on for a moment. And he remembered this too, he had felt something so warm and complete in that moment that it had frightened him. He hadn't understood then why it frightened him. He understood now, because warmth like that, steadiness like that, a love that quiet and that real, it asked something of you, it asked you to be worth it. And it was easier, so much easier, to decide that the person offering it wasn't worth receiving it from. "I knew," Liam said. His voice broke the silence the way a stone breaks still water, sudden and irreversible, the ripples moving outward before you can stop them. Sienna turned from the window. Slowly, she looked at him. "You knew what?" He was looking at the cufflinks, not about your father, not the specifics. "But I always knew that something didn't add up, about the land deal. About how easily that acquisition went through when everything else back then was falling apart." He exhaled through his nose. "I told myself it was luck. I told myself I was just good, that I had finally found the right moment at the right time." He paused. "I was good at telling myself things." Sienna walked back to the table. She didn't sit down. She stood at her end, and she looked at him from across the full length of it, that enormous, expensive, ridiculous table, and she said, "And what did you tell yourself about me?" He looked up. "When things were good," she said, "in the beginning, before the money got comfortable and the cameras started following you and the PR team started shaping your image. Back when it was just us in that rented office on the 4th floor with the broken heating and the one good chair that we both fought over." She almost smiled. "Almost. What did you tell yourself about me then?" Liam was quiet for a moment. "That you were the only real thing in my life," he said. The words landed without decoration. No spin on them, no strategy. Just the flat, honest, devastating truth of a man who had known something true about himself and had chosen, over and over again, to look away from it. Sienna absorbed them. She didn't let them move her, not visibly, not yet, because she had spent a very long time learning the difference between words and choices, and she knew that the truest thing about a person was never what they said in a vulnerable moment, but what they did in every ordinary moment before it. "Then why?" she asked. It wasn't an angry question. It wasn't even a hurt question exactly. It was the real question, the one beneath all the other questions, the one that had been sitting at the bottom of 3 years like something settled on the floor of deep water. Liam opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Because," he said slowly, "when I looked at you, the real you, the steady you, the one who didn't need me to be anything other than what I was, I felt." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I felt like I owed you something I didn't know how to pay, and I didn't know how to live with that debt. So you decided I wasn't worth owing anything to." Sienna said quietly. He didn't deny it. That was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever done in her presence. The door opened, but it wasn't Judge Harrington. It was a woman neither of them had seen that morning, and yet Sienna knew her immediately, the way you know someone whose presence has been described to you so many times that they feel familiar before you've ever shared the same room. She was perhaps 60 years old. Dark skin, silver locks pulled back from her face, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She wore a charcoal blazer and carried a leather satchel that was so worn it had become beautiful the way old things become beautiful. Not despite the wear, but because of it. Her name was Delphine Vance, Elijah's sister, Sienna's aunt. Sienna had met Delphine only twice in her life. Once at a family gathering when she was 12, and once at her father's funeral 4 months ago, where Delphine had held her hand during the burial and said nothing at all, which had been exactly the right thing. She had not known her father had a sister involved in his legal affairs. She had not known a lot of things, it was becoming clear. Delphine walked into the room without hesitation. She acknowledged Liam with a glance that contained everything and offered nothing. Then she crossed to Sienna and took her hands in both of hers and looked at her with an expression that was so much like her father's, that particular quality of seeing someone completely that Sienna had to breathe through it. "You did beautifully," Delphine said quietly. "I didn't do anything," Sienna said. "That's what I mean." Delphine squeezed her hands once, then let go. She set her satchel on the table and opened it. She pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored. Her name written across the front in handwriting she recognized instantly, and she held it out. Sienna looked at the envelope, her father's handwriting, her own name in his hand and beneath it, "Open when the table is yours." Her breath left her body in a slow, uneven exhale. She took the envelope, held it, felt the weight of it, which was not heavy physically but was the heaviest thing she had ever held in her life. "He wrote it 6 months ago," Delphine said. "Before he told any of us he was sick. He gave it to me and said," she paused, and something moved across her face. "Del, my baby is going to need this. I just don't know when yet." Sienna pressed the envelope against her chest. Liam, from his end of the table, watched all of this. He watched Delphine. He watched Sienna. And the thing that was happening on his face was not pity, because pity is looking down at someone, but something closer to the feeling of looking up, of seeing something from below that you never properly saw from where you were standing before. Delphine looked at him then, directly, the way Sienna had looked at Chloe earlier, not with rage but with a clarity that was almost its own kind of power. "My brother," she said, "spent the last 2 years of his life quietly making sure that whatever happened, his daughter would be standing when it was over." She paused. "He didn't hate you, Mr. Sterling. He didn't even blame you, which I personally found and still find remarkable. He just loved his child more than you did." Liam absorbed this without speaking. "He used to say," Delphine continued, "that the measure of a man isn't who he is at his best, it's who he is at his most afraid." She picked up her satchel. "I'll leave you two." She walked back to the door, paused with her hand on the frame, turned back to look at Sienna one more time. "He was so proud of you," she said, "every single day. He used to call me on Sunday mornings just to tell me something you'd done or said that week, something small. He never missed a Sunday." Sienna's eyes filled. She didn't cry, not yet, not here, but her eyes filled and she let them. And she nodded once. Delphine left the room settled. Sienna stood with the envelope against her chest and breathed. Judge Harrington returned at 11:47. Gerald Pruitt came back too, looking considerably more subdued than he had an hour ago. He sat down at Liam's right side and opened his notebook and clicked his pen and then just held it there, hovering because there was nothing obvious left to write. The judge sat, looked around the table, noted Chloe's absence without commenting on it.
Are we ready to continue?
He asked. Marcus Webb said, "Yes, Your Honor." Gerald looked at Liam. Liam nodded slowly. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrington said, "in light of the estate documentation and the character clauses established in the Vance Family Trust, do you wish to proceed with the divorce petition as filed, or do you wish to enter a period of legal review?" Gerald leaned toward Liam. "We should request the review period. 60 days. Give us time to examine Liam." Sienna said his name, not loudly, just clearly her. "Don't do that," she said. Don't spend 60 days with lawyers trying to find a way around something my father spent 30 years building. Don't do that to his memory. She paused. And don't do that to whatever is left of yourself. Gerald started to speak. Liam held up one hand and Gerald stopped. Liam looked at Judge Harrington. I want to make a statement, Liam said. For the record. You may, the judge said. Liam straightened in his chair. He wasn't performing now. The performance, the whole elaborate construction of it, had come down sometime in the last hour, and what was left was something harder to look at but more honest. A man, just a man, with terrible decisions behind him and an unclear road ahead. I filed for divorce, Liam said, because I convinced myself that I had outgrown my life, that I had built something large enough to require a different kind of person beside me. He paused. I was wrong. Not just strategically, morally. I was wrong. He exhaled. I treated my wife, I treated Sienna, in ways that I cannot defend and will not attempt to defend. I said things this morning that, his jaw tightened, I will spend a long time answering for. The room was very still. I'm not withdrawing the divorce petition because of the will, he said. If Sienna wants to leave, she should leave. She has more than enough reason. He looked at her. I'm saying this because it's true, and because the only thing I can think to do right now that isn't completely worthless is to be honest. Sienna looked at him for a long moment. She set the unopened envelope on the table in front of her. She placed both hands flat on either side of it. I know you think, she said slowly, that my father's will changes everything. And in practical terms, yes, it changes a lot. She looked down at the envelope, then back up. But I want you to understand something, Liam. Something that has nothing to do with land or equity or 70% of anything. He waited. I stayed for 3 years, she said, not because I was afraid to leave, not because I didn't see what was happening. I stayed because I believed that the person I saw in you the night before our wedding, that scared, real, unguarded person, was still in there somewhere. I stayed because my father taught me that people are worth more than their worst moments. She paused. But he also taught me that you cannot love someone into becoming who they're supposed to be. They have to choose it themselves. Liam's eyes were wet. He wasn't crying, not quite, but the pressure of it was there, visible. A man holding something back with enormous effort. And so the question, Sienna said, isn't about the divorce papers or the will or the building or the 70%. The question is who you choose to be now. Not for me, for yourself. Because I am going to be fine, Liam. I was always going to be fine. She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands once. My father knew that, she said softly. That's why he wrote this. She opened it. The boardroom held its breath, or maybe that was just Sienna holding hers, as she unfolded the letter inside, one page. His handwriting, careful and measured, the same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards and the deed to buildings that shaped a city. She read it silently. Nobody rushed her. When she finished, she folded it carefully and held it against her chest again. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there were tears on her face. Finally, real and unguarded, the ones she had been carrying all morning, but her chin was up and her shoulders were back, and she looked. In that moment, like every woman who has ever had to hold grief and dignity at the same time and found a way to hold both, she didn't read the letter out loud. That was between her and her father, but she did look at Liam and say, he forgave you. Before any of this happened, he wrote it down so I'd have proof because he knew I'd need it. Liam made a sound, low, broken, the sound of something inside him giving way that had been refusing to give way for a very long time. He pressed both hands over his, and for the first time in possibly years, Liam Sterling, billionaire CEO, the man who had practiced being cruel in a hotel room the night before he tried to throw away his wife, came apart in a boardroom in front of a judge and a lawyer and the woman he had failed, quietly and completely, and without any performance at all. Sienna watched him. She didn't go to him, not because she was cold, but because she understood in the deep instinctive way that some people understand things without being taught, that this moment belonged to him. That the unraveling of a person's false self is sacred and terrible and private, and the kindest thing you can give someone in the middle of it is space. So she stood and she watched, and she let him be broken, because broken is where rebuilding starts. Judge Harrington quietly adjourned the proceedings pending further legal review of the estate documentation. Marcus Webb shook Sienna's hand with both of his, the way her father used to, and said simply, "Elijah would have loved today." Gerald Pruitt gathered his things quickly and left without making eye contact with anyone. Liam was still sitting at the table when Sienna picked up her diary and the letter and walked toward the door. She stopped when she reached it. She turned back one last time. He was looking at her. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen it in years. Stripped of the performance, the strategy, the expensive surface of him, he looked younger. He looked like the man from the hotel room. He looked like someone standing at a beginning rather than an ending. Although he probably couldn't feel that yet, he probably just felt the rubble. "Liam," she said. "Yeah, the braids you always made that comment about." She touched one briefly, lightly. "My mother used to do them for me every Sunday morning when I was little. She'd sit me between her knees and section them out, and we'd talk about everything and nothing for hours." She paused. "When she passed, my father learned how to do them himself. Took him 6 months to get it right. He never missed a Sunday after that." Liam said nothing. He was just listening. Really listening, maybe for the first time. "That's what I was carrying in here today," Sienna said. "Not a strategy, not a legal play. Just them, my parents, in my hair and in my diary and in the way I learned to be still when everything is loud." She turned the door handle. "You called me temporary furniture," she said. "But Liam, I was the house." She opened the door, and she walked out. The Chicago afternoon received her like it had always known she was coming, wide and grey and real, the city moving at its own pace beneath a sky that didn't care about boardrooms or billion-dollar buildings, or the particular cruelty of people who mistake silence for weakness. Sienna walked through the lobby of Sterling Enterprises, a building that sat on land her father had given as a gift that had been declined not in writing but in behavior, in choices, in the slow and daily decision to value the wrong things. And she walked through the glass doors and out onto Michigan Avenue, and she stopped. She stood on the side. She pressed the letter and the diary against her chest. She breathed above her, 42 floors up. The boardroom windows caught the light and threw it back at the street. And somewhere up there, Liam Sterling was sitting alone at a very long table, trying to figure out who he was going to be on the other side of the worst version of himself. Maybe he would get there. Maybe he wouldn't. That was his work, his road. His choice. Sienna's road was her own. She started walking, no destination yet, just forward, just movement, just the specific freedom of a woman who has survived something that was meant to diminish her and found herself on the other side of it, larger than she was before. Not harder, larger. There's a difference that matters. Her phone buzzed. A text from Delphine. "Sunday dinner, my house." "Don't argue," Sienna smiled, the first real, full, unguarded smile of the day. She typed back, "Yes, ma'am." She kept walking. The city moved around her, indifferent and alive, the way cities always are, and she moved through it with her braids catching the wind, and her father's letter pressed against her heartbeat, and 3 years of survival behind her, and something she hadn't felt in a very long time opening up ahead of her like a door swinging wide on its hinges. Not triumph, not revenge, just possibility, the clean, terrifying, beautiful possibility of a life that is entirely your own, the end. Never mistake someone's kindness for weakness. A woman's silence is often the ceiling that keeps your world from collapsing. For every woman who stayed longer than she should have, loved harder than she was loved, and still walked out with her dignity intact, this one is yours.